Dr. Kipp Davis, I really appreciate you. I'm looking forward to the course coming out for our audience. Yeah, that's some exciting news. I was a Christian, really started to fall into the line of being able to defend my Christian faith, and of course became a somewhat apologist online. And I was following many apologists, William Lane Craig, Ravi Zacharias, the list goes on. What are some of the problems you find in general with apologetics? Maybe you feel like getting into specifics. It's up to you. But as a scholar who went through a rigorous course to get where you are, you mentioned in your own story this was a big problem. So tell us what you know or what you think.
So maybe I'll start by saying that. So I was still a Christian when I entered my PhD program at the University of Manchester. And the day that I got to Manchester, I'd registered, I went into Professor George J. Brooks' office for my first consultation. One of the things he asked me he said to me right at the outset, he said, so just to be clear here, he says to me, in this department, we are not looking for Noah's Ark. We're not looking for the Ten Commandments. We're not looking to prove the resurrection of Jesus or the miracles of Elijah and Elisha. He said, this is a serious academic department. That's exactly what he told me. And I think it underscores part of the problems that, or a big problem that I'm sure most academics working within biblical studies, working within the classics and in history have with apologetics. And the problem is that apologetics is always starting from the conclusion. Give a defense for the reason and the hope that you have within you. So you're already starting with an answer, and then you're backing the truck up and loading it with whatever you can find to satisfy that answer. The right questions and the right ideas, which conform to the answer. And I hope everybody can appreciate how flawed this is, because as soon as you take that approach to history or to an ancient text or literature, or in anywhere in science or in I guess in, well, I don't know anything about law, but yeah, certainly in science, as soon as you start from that approach, you have already prejudiced yourself, and even unintentionally, you're going to overlook things that don't conform to the answer that you've already adopted. See, when I started my PhD program, for example, I started with a research question in my head. I wrote on it for a year, at which point I had to revise my research question and some of the direction of my study, because I hadn't already formed an answer about it. I was on the search for, I hate to say the truth, I was on the search for a resolution to this question. And it was in the course of writing my dissertation, it was a process of trial and error. And I think, if memory serves me correctly, it took me over 3 years before I finally had that Gestalt moment. Like, I was looking at a set of manuscripts, trying to figure out what this text is, what it's saying, how are these manuscripts related to each other. And after 3 years of working on this stuff, like, intensely, and then after reading an article which had completely unraveled all the work that I had done up to that point, like I had this breakthrough moment where all of a sudden it was like, oh my God, here's the solution. You know what? This is not something that I started out with in the beginning. I arrived there, and I don't think it's possible to do that within apologetics, because you can't defend a question. Do you know what I mean? Like,
I just figure, like, adding to this, it reminds me of that Habermas discussion with Pine Creek when he said, can you give me a PhD who came into this studying this as a non-Christian ever, wasn't raised Christian, had no background as a Christian, who then by the evidence studied it and came to the conclusion, oh my gosh, the overwhelming evidence has led me, as your language, to the conclusion that Jesus is Lord and he actually rose from the dead, et cetera, et cetera. It's usually, I was raised this way, I got with a woman who is a Christian or whatever it might be. There's always some other influence, and it's not the rigorous work you're talking about.
Exactly. I think there's probably a qualification there. I think it happens in the sciences. For example, I don't know much about his background. I'm fairly sure that, like, Francis Collins came to believe in Jesus as like a PhD scientist after his scientific exploration. But that's sort of besides the point. I think it's more powerful that when it comes to actually studying the history of the religion, the texts that inform almost entirely the Christian faith or Judaism, you'll not find anyone who started out, as an unbeliever, went through this rigorous process of answering questions about the text and the history and coming out the other side going, oh yeah, well, maybe the New Testament has this right. That is something that doesn't happen. And I'll say, so, and this was some of these problems, starting with the question and having an inability to follow the evidence as a result of that. Sorry, starting with the conclusion and having the inability to follow the evidence as a result of that, because you're even subconsciously selecting data from your sample set. This showed up, in a very real way when I was teaching in an evangelical Christian university. One of my jobs when I was still a PhD student and, working at this school was as an assistant to an apologist who taught courses there. And he caused all sorts of problems for our department, like the department that I was in, the biblical studies department, because students would go into his classes and learn the right answers to address their pre-existing faith commitments, but which were completely fallacious and besides the point of what was being taught in their biblical studies classes. And, professors in the biblical studies department started to complain that, look, I'm giving these assignments, or I'm giving this exam, and students are supposed to be listening to, what's taking place in my course on Isaiah or, the formation of the Pentateuch or whatever it is. And they're regurgitating these answers that have nothing to do with what I've been teaching them. Where is this stuff coming from? And here, it comes from having their having their convictions confirmed through a clever set of principles. And it's not a responsible way to do any sort of serious academic work.
brief comment. Josh McDowell, you did a video on him. Lee Strobel. Some Christian's going to come across this who's probably not even going to wait till we get to this point in the video. And this happens so often on Myth Vision. We just, for some reason, the cognitive dissonance can't allow them to even watch the video. But let's just say they get this far and they're like, all right, well, Lee Strobel was a skeptic and went and challenged and found the truth. Or Josh McDowell was a skeptic and went and found the truth. Tell us what you know about them.
First of all, I think any budding apologists listening, listen carefully to me. I think the greatest skill that anybody needs to be an apologist in the first place is not, a first-rate education and lots of knowledge about the Bible or even philosophy. The best qualification for any apologist is unbridled confidence. And that's what guys like McDowell, like Strobel have in spades. So yes, they present themselves as people who came out of this upbringing as hardened atheists who were highly skeptical of every Christian claim. So I did a whole documentary about Josh McDowell, in which I went into exploring how he has told his own story over time. And I discovered in the course of doing that a big part of his whole presentation is his own story, and as a result, it's really actually evolved over time. When you look into it, his actual upbringing and his actual conversion experience is something that looks not completely different, but certainly different from the way he talks about it now. And he's embellished it pretty significantly in a number of places because he knows it sells. It sounds much more dramatic. It's much more convincing if he can gin it up a little bit. And because he's got so much confidence, he's able to tell this story with a straight face. So, he was a teenager, barely an adult, when he became a believer. And if you read carefully in how he writes about it, or even in how he presents it when he gives it in talks and things, it's a very emotional story for him. But so I think for most people, I think that's where becoming a Christian is the most meaningful, and that's the strongest rationale that anybody has for converting. It's out of that emotional state in the first place. So as for Lee Strobel, he presents himself as a former hardened, skeptical, investigative reporter for the Chicago Sun-Tribune. He won an award once for an expose he did on the building of, I believe it was the Ford Pinto safety. The company was cutting corners, and he was part of exposing that, right? So he really depends on this to paint this picture of himself as this, just reporter, doggedly searching for answers, and also highly skeptical. He started out this way, and it would take just a miracle to convince him otherwise. And the way he tells his story is such that his wife became a believer, and he became resentful of the fact that she became a believer. So I think she challenged him, or he got challenged by some other people he knew, to investigate from a critical perspective and historical perspective the claims of Jesus. Well, this all became a best-selling book, The Case for Christ. The book itself is incredibly disappointing and laughably weak in terms of an historical investigation. And the reason for that is because virtually every expert that is interviewed in the book is a believing, confessing Christian, most of them Christian apologists already. If he was really interested in discovering the truth of the Christian claims, then surely as a responsible reporter, he would have consulted both sides. I don't know. But if you dig into his actual history a little bit more, you do notice a couple of things, which I think are convenient. So he started. He published his first book already after he had been working as a pastor at Willow Creek Church, the giant Willow Creek Church in the Chicago suburbs. He had already been there pastoring for, I think, 5 or 6 years, and he didn't get around to publishing Case for Christ until he had been in the church for like at least a decade, working in the church. He's a pastor. So I think that given the timeline from the point of his conversion to the point that he actually got it down on paper, given the content in the book itself, we have every reason to be suspicious and skeptical about the legitimacy of his own conversion story.